When you come home to me, I'll wear a sweeter smile and hope that for a while you'll stay. Okay. Thank you. I'm climbing uphill, Jamie, climbing uphill. I'm up every morning at 6 and standing in line with 200 girls who are younger and thinner than me, who have already been to the gym. I'm waiting 5 hours in line and watching the girls just coming and going in dresses that look just like this, till my number is finally called. When I walk in the room, there's a table of men, always men, usually gay, who've been sitting like I have been listening all day to 200 girls belting as high as they can. I am a good person. I'm an attractive person. I am a talented person.
That's Anna Kendrick singing Jason Robert Brown's great song about trying to be cast in things, because that is the topic of today's show. I'm going to just begin by recalling a Ronald Reagan anecdote that he liked to tell. And here's how he told it. I'll never forget the reaction of my old boss at Warner Brothers, Jack Warner, when he first heard that I was running for governor of California. He said, "Oh, no. Jimmy Stewart for governor. Reagan for best friend." I'm also auditioning to play Ronald Reagan in a biopic, and so that's a whole other subtext of all this. But, in a way, casting is just sort of there all the time. It's mainly in movies and television and theater and stuff like that. But you could argue that, I still don't know how Robert F. Kennedy Jr. got the role of Health and Human Services Secretary. He must have had a great audition. Anyway, we're going to talk about casting today. We're welcoming back to Michael Schulman, staff writer at The New Yorker and the author of Oscar Wars, A History of Hollywood in Gold, Sweat, and Tears. Buy it in time for this year's Oscars. Trade it with your friends. And we are going to talk, first of all, about the news, which is that the Oscars will now give out an award for achievement in casting. So let's talk a little bit about that. So, Michael, welcome back.
Hi. Glad to be back.
And by the way, you should ask your colleague, Adam Gopnik, about how close I came to getting the role of Adam Gopnik in Tar. I called back a couple of times. I thought I had.
Yeah, I hear it was neck and neck.
Yeah, I think he knows people, But anyway, talk a little bit about this idea. I've heard people talk about this for a long time. If you watch the documentary Casting By, which is about Marion Doherty and other people who are the forerunners in this field, Scorsese starts by saying this is such an underrated aspect. You can't almost overstate the importance of good casting. So talk about how they came to be honoring it this time.
Yeah, this conversation's been going on for a while in the Academy. The casting branch is not that old. It started in 2013. So it's a relatively new branch of the Academy. And, the casting directors have been advocating to add a category for what they do. But there's also been pushback, especially from directors who feel like, they are making the ultimate casting decisions and the casting directors are just helping them. Of course, you could also say, well, the same could be said of costume design or cinematography or anything. The buck stops with the director, but it is a sub discipline of filmmaking, and why not? And, casting is it had been one of the only credits sort of in the opening titles that had not been acknowledged by the Oscars. So they finally got around to adding that, and they're also going to add stunt design in the next couple of years. And it's been interesting. It's been an interesting conversation because the voters in the Academy, as well as the public, now have an opportunity to kind of learn more about what casting is and who these people are who are in this profession and what it means to honor it. There's been some confusion, I think, because some people feel like, oh, well, is this kind of like the SAG Award for Best Ensemble or whatever it's called now, the Actor Award? And it's not quite that. It's, the nominees are the casting directors of these movies. So what do they do?
Yeah, actually, in casting by the director Taylor Hackford, he objects to the term casting director. He's very proprietary about the idea of director. He's the director. The casting person does something else, but they don't direct. So yeah, there's a little bit of tension around this. But so one of the things that you did was to get a list of your favorite examples of really great casting. One of them is Midnight Cowboy, which we learn a little bit about from that documentary too. And I think, Michael, casting in a way it's at least two things and probably many more. But there's like the people at the top. So Midnight Cowboy, it's Jon Voight and Dustin Hoffman. But it's also an ensemble. And sometimes people like Marion Doherty were the people who would populate the rest of the casting list, where some of the subtlety and magic takes place there. But maybe we should just talk at the top. One thing we learned in the documentary is that Voight had gotten a role in Naked City and by his own description had screwed it up and had just stunk up the place. And he didn't think that Marion Doherty was ever going to help him out again. I mean, it's just kind of interesting. It's an example of how you can mess up and still have a casting director see something in you.
Yeah, and advocate for you and make sure the director isn't just in his or her comfort zone, and maybe there's something that the casting director sees in a newcomer that the director just hasn't been able to see. I mean, that's a great story in that documentary about how Marion Doherty really pushed for Jon Voight. I mean, I love that documentary, and it's a great way, if people haven't seen it, to kind of get to know the history of casting. In the old Hollywood studio system, it was basically just people who worked in the studios who kind of made lists of people they had on contract. It was kind of like clerical work. And then in the 60s around, there were two kind of pioneering casting directors, Marion Doherty, who was in New York, and she did stuff like Midnight Cowboy, Panic in Needle Park, The Sting. And then in LA, this guy, Lynn Stalmaster, who did like West Side Story, The Graduate, Harold and Maude. He found Christopher Reeve for Superman. And, those two kind of like on East and West Coasts created this new way of doing the profession because the studio system had broken down. It wasn't like, you had a stable of actors who were signed to MGM or something. And people had to be found out in the wild. And what's great about Midnight Cowboy, as an example, is that that movie really set the tone for like the new Hollywood of the 70s. It was very New York. It was very kind of real people who you might find on the street. And even the little roles in that movie, like the people who were at the Andy Warhol factory party, are so particular and so perfect for that movie, for the tone of that movie.
Yeah, and we should say that in the Mel Brooks documentary, we recently discovered that Dustin Hoffman had been considered for the role of Hans, the deranged ex-Nazi or ongoing Nazi playwright in the producers, and that he was suddenly unavailable because he got cast in a role that involved fictionally stripping Anne Bancroft, Mel Brooks' wife, in The Graduate. But then after that, even though the film hadn't been released, it was clear that he was leading man material. So there were people telling him, I think I have this right from the documentary, don't take the Midnight Cowboy role because it's this kind of scuzzy, scrappy, unattractive guy, Ratso Rizzo. And so sometimes the actor has to kind of decide who he wants to be as an actor in terms of casting.
Yeah, and I think Lynn Stalmaster had already picked him out of obscurity for The Graduate while Marion Doherty was trying to get him into Midnight Cowboy. Then the movie comes out, The Graduate comes out, he becomes overnight famous, and suddenly he's attached to this other movie, Midnight Cowboy, and he's not sure if he wants to do it now that he's a huge star. Of course, he did, and it was a great part for him. But yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously an essential element of casting, discovering new people. Casting directors see just hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of people. I have a friend who's a casting director, and he says it's even harder now because so much of auditioning has gone to self-tapes and virtual, since the pandemic. And so instead of sitting in a room where you can see, maybe 50 people in a day, you get 500 tapes, and you're expected to see them all. And of course, no one can physically do that. So it's even more like finding these needles in a haystack.
No, absolutely, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in the third segment as well. We'll be talking to two people who have been through this process, Mellini Kantayya and Connor Ratliff, who has a famous casting story that has endured and endured. But yeah, so much I want to get to here, but I think another thing that I thought about. Oh, I wanted to say this too. That we think these people come out of nowhere, right? And one thing that the Casting by documentary makes clear is no, they're like Robert Duvall, who turns out to have been sharing an apartment or living upstairs from Dustin Hoffman. They're both unknown, but they're kicking around, and you do some theater stuff, probably south of Houston, and you're, and then you get in Naked City in a little tiny, role. These people are around, and the casting directors, they look at Duvall, and I think, at some point they say he's kind of a Swiss Army knife. He could be a villain, he could be Boo Radley, he could be ultimately Augustus McCrae, But it's not like they come out of nowhere. They've been hanging around, kind of starving and hoping to get this moment.
Yeah, and in that era, in like late 60s through the 70s, there were so many actors who were really seriously pursuing theater in New York, and it wasn't the same kind of history where, you went out to Hollywood and sat at Schwab's lunch counter waiting to be discovered by someone. So the casting directors were looking at, the off Broadway theater scene to find some of these huge talents that then became gigantic movie stars. But I think the reason why the 70s are so fun to talk about in terms of casting is that there was kind of a whole new type of actor that had to be discovered because the tastes were changing. It wasn't about having these perfect looking matinee idols on the screen as it had been, throughout the first part of the 20th century. There was this kind of style change, and you wanted to see, movies were all about like finding people who seemed real. There was kind of a new naturalism that trickled down to casting, or that trickled up from casting. And so that's just an interesting era to think about just how casting worked, because people were being found in different places and different ways, and the kind of general profile of who could be, what a movie star looked like and sounded like and felt like on screen was changing.
Another thing that I was thinking about as we were getting ready for the show is that you can have a really great cast. I think JFK is an interesting example of, it's not a movie that I really love, but what a cast. Kevin Costner, Kevin Bacon, Tommy Lee Jones, Laurie Metcalf, Gary Oldman, Michael Rooker, Sissy Spacek, Joe Pesci, Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau, Donald Sutherland, Ed Asner, Brian Doyle Murray, John Candy, who was, by the way, amazing in his little role there, Sally Kirkland, Wayne Knight. I could go on. There's like more people on. There's Gary Oldman. Did I say him yet? That's like just this incredible ensemble. I'm not exactly sure maybe they have like too many name actors or something. It isn't as good as some of the examples you give in your article of the best cast movies.
Yeah, sometimes I do feel like certain movies are too packed with recognizable people. I think about Lincoln, the Spielberg movie, which of course was led by Daniel Day-Lewis and Sally Field. But then like everyone who worked in the White House was sort of someone you'd seen on TV. And I remember like Tommy Lee Jones plays a senator, I think, who gets into bed at the end, and the camera pans over, and you see that his wife is supposed to be a black woman, which is a huge reveal, except it's Ethapatha Murkison. And I'm like, oh, but gosh, that's Ethapatha Murkison. So for me, it's like, sometimes you don't need everyone in every tiny little part to be someone recognizable. Like Adam Driver is also in that movie as sort of someone who works in the White House, and you kind of think, oh, it's that guy from Girls, because that's who he was then. And yeah, or like Oppenheimer was just packed. Yep. Every single moment was packed with like some new famous person, which is one way to do it. But, sometimes it really helps to have kind of stars in the foreground, and then the world around them is just people you don't recognize, and you just accept that as the real world that the character is walking through.
Yeah, sometimes with a movie like Oppenheimer, you go, "Oh, really? Only 4 minutes of Casey Affleck? That was so good. I want more." And we're moving on. So one of the movies that you highlighted is Nashville, the Robert Altman movie. And I think that's an interesting one for me because it is another one that has kind of quote unquote everybody in it. But I think it was the first movie I ever watched, and I was, old enough to watch it when it came out, and thought, this is really an ensemble movie. This is, there are some people doing star turns, kind of, but almost the thrust of the movie is the aggregation of these characters with their intersecting lives and roles. Altman is kind of almost making a statement about casting as opposed to having a couple of marquee movie stars.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, God, I love that movie, Nashville. There's 24 main characters, 24, and they're pretty evenly distributed. I mean, they all have things to do. Some of them sort of stand out more than others, like Lily Tomlin and Ronee Blakley were both nominated for Best Supporting Actress, and, they're sort of a little more in the foreground, but really, it's just like, you just look, people whiz by, like, Shelley Duvall, Jeff Goldblum is like a motorcycle man in that movie, and Altman had such a great eye for oddballs. Everyone he gravitated toward has a little bit of an off kilter quality, but they all are off kilter sort of within the same universe. And then of course there's a lot of improvising, overlapping dialogue. So it's this tapestry of people, and the main character is the city of Nashville, and they're all the people who live in it, but in this sort of warped version of Nashville.
Okay, for $10 million, another movie in which Jeff Goldblum and Shelley Duvall appear.
Is there an answer?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God, I have no idea.
Annie Hall, which also has Christopher Walken, Colleen Dewhurst, Goldblum for 2 seconds, Sigourney Weaver in her first role, Carol Kane, Shelley Duvall, Marshall McLuhan, who went on to do great things in acting, Paul Simon, surprisingly good in his role. I mean, that's also an example of I don't think Woody Allen did that. I think his casting director did that. But
Julia Taylor, right?
Yeah,
I mean, she was one of Marion Doherty's proteges, who then cast all the Woody Allen movies.
Yeah, it's just immaculately cast, and you just sort of see. Before we run out of time, we have some more time left, but I don't want to miss this. So we should talk maybe a little bit about the nominees this year and the kind of first time ever example of giving out a casting award. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts already, if you have a favorite. I should say before you even answer, Marty Supreme is such an unusual bit of casting. There's a lot of stunt casting that goes on in there, and you've got Abel Ferrara. The director has a big role. The writer Pico Iyer has a big role. The basketball player George Gervin has a very obscure role. I mean, there's a lot of people who aren't exactly actors who are in there, and you just
we could go on and on. I mean, my favorite person who appears in that movie is John Katsimatidis, who's the supermarket magnate from Gristedes, and also a kind of New York City political figure for years and years and years. Like, what a strange person to put in a movie, but kind of perfect for this movie. Tyler, the Creator, is in there.
Yeah.
Isaac Mizrahi shows up.
He's good.
Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank has a huge part. I mean, if I were to give the award out tomorrow, I would give it to Marty Supreme, which is cast by Jennifer Venditti, just because it's so unusual, and it kind of calls attention to itself, but I don't know. There's also other movies this year that are nominated where there are kind of non-traditional actors in it, like this woman in The Secret Agent, Tania Maria, was is a dressmaker in Brazil who the director, Kleber Mendonça Filho, picked out as an extra from his, from a previous movie of his, and gives her a pretty good part. And now she's sort of like a star in Brazil.
Yeah, so the nominees, by the way, are Hamnet, Marty Supreme, One Battle After Another, The Secret Agent, and Sinners.
And Sinners has Miles Caton, who's an incredible find. I think he's like 20 years old, but he was primarily a musician, and he plays the young blues musician in the film, and he's fantastic. I mean, that voice of his. I mean, he's such a great find. I thought he was going to get nominated for Best Supporting Actor, but that's just a great example of just how to find someone new for a very particular part.
Yeah. So we got time for maybe one more thing to talk about. The producer's being very strict with me. One of the movies that you cite, and it's really interesting, is The Breakfast Club in 1985. It's a John Hughes movie, and it's sort of a Rosetta Stone for what a whole bunch of actors are going to be doing in movies for a while after that. I mean, The Breakfast Club is Molly Ringwald, Judd Nelson, Emilio Estevez, Ali Sheedy, and Anthony Michael Hall. And I mean, they just go on to sort of be a generation of actors. I don't know how unknown any of them was at that moment. Certainly Emilio Estevez might have been known to people a certain way. But yeah, say just a little bit about The Breakfast Club and why it works for you that way.
Yeah, well, when I was choosing, my assignment was for the New Yorker was to choose like who from history would I have given this award to, and if this casting award existed all along. So I chose a bunch that we've talked about. And, I thought of The Breakfast Club just because it's a movie that's really about five people, and they have to be the right five people, and they have to be sort of types. There's the popular girl, there's the geek, there's the jock, etc. There's the sort of burnout. And they have to slot into those types, but then also kind of do something that's more interesting than be those types. And all of those people, it's so hard to imagine anyone else doing any of those roles because they're so, to use an overused word, iconic in them. Molly Ringwald was not totally unknown. She had already been in 16 Candles, and, but some of these people were also at the same time in St. Elmo's Fire, which sort of collectively created this thing that's known as the Brat Pack. But kind of like the 70s, this is another moment where there's sort of a new wave of actors coming up and sort of changing what movie stars looked like, and this new generation arriving. And The Breakfast Club, just to me, is a great example of a movie that needed people who weren't very established, because they're all young, they're all playing high school students, and found these people who set the tone for movies going forward and who themselves are so attached to those characters that, they're inextricable from The Breakfast Club 40 years later.
That whole, we have to go, but that whole inextricable conversation, it is one that we could have a lot. When I saw the documentary about the movie Galaxy Quest, and it turned out that Tim Allen was not at all the first. I'm not a Tim Allen fan at all, but I can't imagine Galaxy Quest. It was going to be Alec Baldwin, and he turned it down, and Steve Martin, and there was one other person who was considered just all actors that I would admire more than Tim Allen, and yet I'm so grateful.
And these stories, it's so fun to talk about. Oh, who almost got the part? Can you imagine if this person had been in it? And that's what casting is. It's like finding the people who, once you see them in these parts, you can never imagine anyone else doing them. Of course, as the casting directors this year have been campaigning, it's been a little tricky because they don't want, part of casting is being discreet, and they don't really want to talk about all the people who didn't get the part. So it's been a little strange on the campaign circuit for them. But yeah, there's no better success in casting than thinking 40 years later, how could it have been anyone else?
Okay, I'm really in trouble now, so we have to go to a break here. But believe me, people are not going to be saying, I can't imagine anybody but Adam Gopnik in the role of Adam Gopnik. I could have done that.
Should have been you. Missed opportunity.
Michael Schulman, they said I had dead eyes. Michael Schulman is a staff writer at The New Yorker and the author of Oscar Wars, A History of Hollywood in Gold, Sweat, and Tears. Get it in time for this year. You'll be a better conversationalist. Thanks for being with us again. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk to a casting director.
The script is blowing out to sea, but what the hell, we didn't even pass an audition.
So we are back. Now we are going to talk to John Frank Levy, 4-time Emmy Award-winning casting director and the author of Right for the Role, Breakdowns, Breakups, and Breakthroughs from 35 years of casting iconic TV shows. Some of those iconic TV shows include Animal Kingdom, Shameless, Southland, ER, Third Watch, The West Wing, China Beach. I could go on. But first of all, welcome to our conversation, John Frank Levy.
Thank you very much, and forgive me, but it's Levy.
Oh, Levy, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm actually, it was all spelled out for me and I read it wrong. Okay, so John Frank Levy, let me just tell you your invisible hand in my life, because I think one of the things is we forget. We forget who's doing this. So I'm watching the series Animal Kingdom, and I'm thinking, oh, yeah, there's that guy, Sean Hatosi. I'm probably mispronouncing his name, too. I liked him so much in Southland. He's so... Hatosi, okay. So I liked him so much in Southland. He was so great. And now he's in this. No, it never occurred to me to think, oh, it's probably the same casting director. Partly because the work that you do, it is a little bit invisible, or at least not as ascribable. People don't think about the casting director, do they?
No, they don't. And that makes sense because we don't do it by ourselves. We work with writers and directors and showrunners, and the showrunner has the final say about decisions. So, we're a collaborative member of a community that produces the casting. But I've known Sean, for instance, for many years. He played a character on ER when I first met him, a character with multiple personalities. And now he is on The Pit for John Wells Productions. So I think that's his fourth job for John Wells.
Yes, the person that you've worked with an awful lot over time. And I know that we think of, those of us outside the business, I think we imagine auditions to be this grinding, excruciating experience for actors in which rejection just hovers over them like the sword of Damocles. And I know that you work hard to make it not be like that. Can you say something about that?
Sure. I think one of my jobs is to be a force of relaxation, a force of focus and paying attention to the job at hand. I always tell actors, if they ask me, how to deal with their nerves and the potential for it to be a horrible experience. And the answer to that is to do your work. And I respect actors greatly, love them, want them to succeed. And I think I communicate that to them. And so what could be an arduous and unpleasant, tension-filled experience is actually an opportunity to do the thing they love, which is act.
So John Wells, the auteur showrunner that you just mentioned, who you've worked with so much, has said about you that you can basically see through a bad audition at times, that somebody may not be at their best, may not be auditioning well, may have made some bad decisions about how to audition, but you might be able to spot something there anyway. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. I've always been a watcher and a listener. I think that started when I was a kid because my mom was a kind of bohemian, independent creature who surrounded our living room with other people who were unique and interesting. And I would sit in the corner of the room and watch these people and wonder about them. And I grew a fascination and an enormous respect for people's inside life. And I think I was able to bring that to my work as a casting director. I can, when I was writing the book, I described myself as a vibist. And one of my closest friends said, that's someone who plays the vibraphones in a jazz band. You can't say that. And I said, well, no, I know what I mean. And I kept it in. And actually that sentence has resonated with a number of people. I do get people. I don't know. Some of it has to do with that experience as a kid, but I just am fascinated by people and I love people and I love actors. And I think those are the two most important components of a successful casting director is the love of people and the love of actors creating people.
So I want to go from there. That builds perfectly towards something I wanted to ask you about, which is an example of a time where you were looking for a new actor, someone I believe to kind of replace George Clooney, as if such a thing were possible, on ER. And you wind up looking at a very talented young man who's now become kind of a household word. Maybe not exactly right for this role, but tell us what it was like to audition Jon Stewart for ER.
Well, I didn't audition John, but I had a general meeting with him. Actually, I think it was the week of 9/11. I had 2 meetings. I think I might have been one of only 10 people on the lot at Warner Brothers. I met with Padma Lakshmi, who I've been in love with ever since, and Jon Stewart. And I was overwhelmed by how smart and funny he is. And I thought he would have been a great potential person. Of course, John's not an actor.
Mm-hmm.
And so that posed a bit of an issue when I brought it up to Mr. Wells.
I do want to go briefly visit the parallel universe where he does that role and just see what it looked like, because it wouldn't necessarily have been terrible. One of the things you talk about is that some people go into auditions and they think, how will I be remembered? If they audition 50 people, how will I be remembered? You've suggested that maybe people should not try gimmicky things like bringing a dog, or in one case, did somebody actually slam you up against the wall?
Oh, in more than one case, yeah. Actually, early on in my career, I was working with the notorious and fabulous Marsha Kleinman, and we were doing a movie that Whoopi Goldberg was starring in. It was called Burglar, or The Burglar, maybe. And there was a guy who had auditioned several times, and he asked me beforehand if he could grab me by the shoulders at a certain point in the scene. And I thought, what the hell? And I said yes. But instead, he grabbed me by the front of my shirt. And it happened, I didn't have any money in those days, and it was a green linen shirt that I really loved.
Oh, no.
And it tore in both of his hands as he threw me up against the wall. And I did bounce off the wall and suggest that it was his time to get punched in the nose.
There must be people with whom you build up a kind of relationship where you just kind of know they can do stuff. I don't know. I was looking over the stuff that you've worked on, and I was thinking, well, Carl Lumley's in a lot of these things. And I bet at a certain point you just go, oh, yeah, no, he could do that. I know how good he is.
Yeah, absolutely.
You see a little bit about that. Yeah.
You develop a kind of repertory company of people that you have trust and faith in, and people that you know take the work seriously and aren't going to be a pain in the ass. Can I say that?
You can say that.
Aren't going to be a pain in the ass on the set, and are going to do their job with professionalism, skill, talent, and all of that, and not be difficult or unpleasant to work with. And those people, whenever something pops up that someone like Carl Lumley, something pops up that they would be right for, it's a great relief and a great confidence thing where you can just go, at a certain point, we're having a long time relationship with someone like John Wells. I could say to him, Sean Hattasey would be great for this. And he would go, yeah, you're right. That's a good idea.
One thing I want to get to before we run out of time, because I know it's important to you, is that idea of casting people in a diverse way, and casting people who are, you've cast people who are HIV positive, transgender, deaf, marginalized for other reasons. Talk a little bit about your philosophy about that kind of thing.
Well, despite the fact that the president just bragged that he eliminated diversity, inclusion, and et cetera, it's long been an important thing for me. I came from a family that believed greatly in social justice and worked towards it. That was imbued in me as a young person, and I participated in that throughout my life. And I felt that when I got this job and started having some success, that it was a real opportunity for me to present the world as it ought to be, and as it is, as opposed to the world that maybe is idealized in some other ways. And I was very fortunate because ER and China Beach before it were both environments, worlds in which diversity and inclusion were not only appropriate, they were really required.
Yeah, and just to make you feel a little better, The president is a terrible casting director. He looked at Pam Bondi's tape and said, yeah, she'd be a good attorney general. So he doesn't know what he's talking about, and you do. John Frank Levy, 4-time Emmy Award-winning casting director and author of Right for the Role, Breakdowns, Breakups, and Breakthroughs from 35 years of casting iconic TV shows. Thank you so much for your time today. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back with 2 actors who can tell you about being on the other side of this process.
Only one I've got. Plus a tube of grease paint on a follow spot. I'm just a Broadway baby. If I stick it long enough, I may get to strut my stuff. Working for an Iceman like a Ziegfeld or a Weissman in a great big Broadway.
It's just come back to me that Kevin Kline was the other person who almost got cast in Galaxy Quest as the captain. All right, today I want to say thank you to our technical producer. Today, that's the Jedi Master himself, Gene Amatruda, with a little bit of help from our usual technical producer, the maestro, Dylan Reyes. Jonathan McPants is the producer of this show. I also want to quickly say, Southland is really good, and it just got dropped onto Netflix recently, and you should watch it. And Michael Cudlitz and Regina King, it was, for me, the breakthrough thing for Regina King. They're all so great. But also great are our guest right now, Mellini Kantayya, actor, writer, and author of Actor, Writer, Whatever, Essays on My Rise to the Top of the Bottom of the Entertainment Industry. It's not in my notes here, but also EpiPen activist. And I think like on Oprah.com, she's one of the 14 people who are saving us from dying or something. She also recently appeared on Your Friends and Neighbors on Apple TV and Diddy on Trial as it happened on Hulu. Oh no, am I going to have to watch Diddy on Trial as it happened? I guess. Yeah. I want to see Mellini. I don't want to miss it. Connor Ratliff is with us, actor, writer, and comedian and creator and host of the Dead Eyes podcast. Connor Ratliff will headline the Hartford Improv Festival at the CT Improv Comedy Theater on Saturday, March 28th. Tickets go on sale in March. So, Mellini, welcome back to the show. It's been a minute.
Yes, thank you for having me.
I discovered on IMDb today your sizzle reel, and I was appropriately sizzled by it.
Thank you.
I wasn't over sizzled, but I also wasn't under sizzled. I was
just appropriately sizzled. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So, talk a little bit. I know that you have warm feelings about casting directors to some degree, and sometimes it's their vision that might get you into a part. Say a little bit about that.
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, for a couple of lots of reasons. When I started out, all auditions were in person, and very rarely would you do a self-tape. Only before the pandemic, maybe 1 out of 10 would be a self-tape, and usually if it was for something that's shot in LA, and I'm based out of New York. So that's usually when you do it. Most of the time, you'd go in. And, when I started out, they weren't any parts for South Asian Americans, Indian Americans like myself that weren't stereotypical, that weren't, frankly, racist or it's their vision that Tori Viscilio, who did One Life to Live at the time when it was on the air, said, why not? And so I was cast as a nurse, and I was the first South Asian American to have a recurring role on a soap opera. So I'm very, very both proud and disappointed that I was the person to break down barriers, and I'm not the one thanking the person that did that decades before me. And also now as we move forward, as far as I really feel like the casting community is really picking up the mantle for disabled performers. So I definitely have very warm and fuzzy feelings for how a lot of casting directors are moving the needle forward as far as representation, for sure.
So, Connor, I think your origin story is familiar to a lot of people, but maybe not to everybody. The podcast is just so fabulous, but there's kind of an inciting incident that created the podcast and the name of it. I'm sure you're tired of telling this story, but just give us the thumbnail.
Yeah, I mean, the podcast is about when I was starting as an actor. I was cast in the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers, and then I was uncast after Tom Hanks was directing the episode I was going to be in. It was a very small part. And the day before I was supposed to shoot, I got a call from someone in my agent's office saying, you need to come in and re-audition in person for Tom Hanks. He's looked at your audition tape and he's having second thoughts. He thinks you have dead eyes. And so I re-auditioned for him and then was immediately fired. And then I did a podcast 20 years later that was sort of a mock. It was sort of using the format of like true crime investigations to try to like get to the bottom of this very small, very unimportant, very typical kind of thing. It happens all the time. The only thing that was slightly unusual in my story is usually there's not that kind of breakdown in communication where you get told something that probably should have been uttered behind closed doors, you know?
Yeah, but I think that happens, like, just listening to your podcast. I mean, and I want to, this will segue well into something Mellini can talk about too, but you just did not that long ago, you did an episode about how you almost got cast as Colonel Sanders. But in the middle of you almost being cast as Colonel Sanders, you heard one of the people in the casting process say, "Hey, what's Daryl Hammond doing these days?" I mean, audibly to you, they were suggesting somebody that you probably knew right at that moment had a much better chance than you.
Yeah, that was one of those situations where you could feel in the room it going from... there's a point in the audition process where it starts to get real. You realize that everything up to then has been sort of low stakes. And there's a part where they start looping in other people to sign off on things. And we were in that mode where it's starting to get real. And then you could feel the temperature on my possibility dropping in the room. The second someone had that other idea, it was literally as I was walking out the door, I heard someone like, "Hey, I wonder about this other guy." I was just like, "Oh, that's a better idea. I'm not going to get this."
Yeah, and we should say that they ultimately decided not to have a stable Colonel Sanders. It was like 2 weeks later, it's Norm Macdonald or something.
Yeah, what I was auditioning for was going to be like a years-long thing, and then and they were having me do all kinds of improv and stuff in the auditions, and it was for a long-term gig. And that idea sort of changed as they started realizing, like, hey, we got to have a different colonel every 2 weeks, you know?
All right. So, Mellini, you've got to tell at least one commercial story. And I think it's going to be Hewlett Packard. But say how close you came to being associated with an infuriating printer. I own one.
Yes. Well, the funny thing is, okay, so I get an audition from my commercial agent saying they want to see you for, again, this is back when we did in person, for some branded content. And back then, I think it was sort of in the belle epoque of streaming and everyone's getting artsy. And they said, but don't worry, it's going to be touchy-feely. It's not going to have anything to do with printers. I'm like, okay. I show up, and it actually was cast by one of the Oscar nominees for the Marty movie, Jennifer Venditti and Marty Supreme, and she also brilliantly cast Uncut Gems. And I show up, I do the audition, great, go home, get the call back. You know, they're calling you back for the director, show up. And I believe it was after Booksmart, but definitely after the Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros video. And the director is Olivia Wilde. So meanwhile, like, I'm very calm, but, you know, my heart's a fluttering. Do the audition, book it. I'm beyond excited. Show up on set. The main act to play a doctor. The main actress is just gorgeous and young and just charisma just seeping out of her pores. I'm like, oh, she's going to be a star. And I was right. It was Margaret Qualley, who is a household name right now. I did it. Olivia Wilde was an absolute dream to work with. And, you know, Google the name of the short film, which is called Wake Up, by the way, if anyone's interested. And it's very good. And so excited to watch it. And I'm completely cut out of it. But if you really pay attention, you can see my hand running a medical instrument across Margaret Qualley's leg. And that is my 3 degrees of separation from 2 degrees or 1 degree from an Oscar-nominated casting director.
I thought that was a scene from Honey Don't. But anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's one of the things I really love about Dead Eyes is, in fact, as you say, it's sort of like a crime podcast or something. And so one of the things you've done is you've talked to a lot of people, Connor, who were connected with that, including Tom Hanks and people who've been connected to Tom Hanks, like Colin Hanks and Marty Hanks and Hank Azaria and anybody who might have any conceivable connection to this. Just say a little bit about this. I mean, I don't know how serious an attempt to make sense of this it was, but I would guess that it mainly hammered home the senselessness of the universe.
Yeah, I mean, and also the way that a lot of it had to do with, these things are very small tragedies to the individual actor when you realize you're just a cog in a giant system. I mean, the thing you were just mentioning about getting, even when you get the job, you don't know until you see the final thing. They can cut you at any moment, which is not the same as getting fired, but sometimes like you tell people, hey, I'm going to be, I was in a Super Bowl ad a couple of years ago.
Oh, I never tell anybody ever.
I made the mistake. Yeah, I made the mistake of telling everybody I'm going to be in a Super Bowl ad. And turns out I was in the 90-second online version of the Super Bowl ad that they cut down to 30 seconds during the Super Bowl. And I was not in that part of it. So that's a lesson that I keep relearning and forgetting. But the main thing you sort of discover a lot of the times is, more often than not, whenever I haven't been cast in something, you see the finished result and you realize it's very rare that I look at something that I almost got cast in and I think, oh, they should have cast me. Almost always I look at it and realize, oh, right, they got this person. That's a whole different vibe than I bring to it. And you kind of, in some ways, like, more often than not, the thing I ended up discovering was that it was very rare that anyone who hadn't cast me had made a terrible mistake. Usually it was like, oh, there's a lot of talented people and everyone's a different flavor. And sometimes it's something that I think I'm 100% perfect for. I see the finished product. I'm like, that guy's really good. What am I going to do? Like you can't feel too bad about it. It's not personal, Sometimes,
and a lot of times, if I can interject really quickly, and a lot of times when you do see a big star that's been cast instead of you, or someone that's a household name or whatnot, they got the role before you even got the audition. You were just sort of the backup. And with our strike, we can actually ask when we audition now, has this role already been offered to somebody? But before the strike, we never knew, and it was always just a lot more heartache than I think we needed or deserved, but that's sometimes the case.
Whenever, like, I've had parts where I feel like, oh man, I'd be really good for this, and then the finished thing is like Stephen Root or someone like that, and you're just like, well, I can't really quibble with, like that's, it's humbling, but it's also healthy to have a clear-eyed view of what role you are in the process. You're an option.
You guys are so sane and well balanced about all this. I can't watch Tar without getting mad that I didn't get cast as Adam Gopnik. I'm still furious. I just watched the beginning and anyway, thank you so much for both of your time. Mellini, it's just so great to have you back on the show. It has been a while. Connor Ratliff, I'm really loving Dead Eyes. I have to say, so many podcasts, so little time. I was late in getting to it, but now I'm totally hooked. And it's very funny and very wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
And come see Connor on March 28th at the CT Improv Comedy Theater for the Hartford Improv Festival. Tickets go on sale in March. Thanks to everybody who helped out today. Thanks to you at home who are listening. Or you might not be at home. You might be just wandering on a median strip listening. But whatever you're doing, thanks for listening. And we will be back tomorrow.
Wait and see. There's a bell. Follow me.